Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss about the Uniform Resource Locator in Chapter 12. Let's now move on to the topic. So what is URL? So URL is Uniform Resource Locator. It is used to specify the address of a document on the internet. When you go for a search on the internet, so we'll be typing some web address in a particular location. So that is a URL. So what an URL have? So URL will have the address of a document, otherwise we can call it as a web address. And by using that web address, we'll be proceeded with a search on a particular website. So it is actually the address of a particular website. Let's now discuss about the basic URL structure. So the basic URL structure will have a protocol, a domain name and the path. So the protocol used in the URL is HTTP, that is a hypertext transfer protocol, and we will have the subdomain and the main domain name, and we'll be also having the top level domain name. So the URL consists of all these things. So it is actually a web address. URL is made up of 4 parts. So first one is a protocol, host name, or we can call it as a domain name, and the next one is a folder name, and at last the file name. Here is an example for the parts of a URL. So we'll have HTTP protocol and we'll be having some domain name, or we can call it as a host name, and we have the folder name, and at last we'll be having the file name. So the file name may be anything. It may be an image file, otherwise a HTML file, otherwise an animated GIF files or a CSS file. Now we'll discuss about the URL types. Depending on the location of a document, the URL is divided into 2 types. So first one is absolute URL and the second one is relative URL. First we'll discuss about the absolute URL. Absolute URL contains the complete address of a document on the internet. So this absolute URL contains all the information that are required to find the files on the internet. As we have already discussed about the basic URL parts, that is the basic URL will have this protocol, host name, folder name and file name. So if the URL contains all these information, then it is called as absolute URL. So an absolute URL will have all these 4 parts, and we have a disadvantage of an absolute URL. If any one of the 4 parts is missed, then the browser would not able to link to the specific file. So that is a disadvantage in absolute URL. Now we'll see the next type of URL, that is relative URL. Relative URL contains the partial address of a document on the internet. It contains only the file name or the file name with folder name. We can use this type of URL when the file is on the same server related to the original document. For example, when you run a HTML file, you might have noticed that you will be using some browsers to run your files. So you might have saved your file in a particular folder. So what you'll do, so when you go for a browser, you will be giving your folder name and then you will specify the file name. So that is a best example for relative URL. The relative URL will have either the file name, or if you save the file in a folder, you have to specify that folder name with the file name for running the HTML file. So that is a very good example for a relative URL. This is how we can specify the relative URL as we have discussed about the example. Suppose if you want to run the HTML file, so what you'll do is first you'll be typing some HTML codes in a notepad or some text editor. So you'll be giving some codings of HTML and you will be saving the file. Suppose if you save the file directly in any drive without using a folder, so how you can run that particular file? To run the HTML file, you need to open any web browsers. So there are many browsers available. So when you open the browser, you will be having some main directory. So all the web related files are located in the main directory. The main directory is also called as root. Here the main directory is http://www.msn.com. So MSN is a Microsoft network which is supported by the browser Internet Explorer. Suppose if you are accessing a file directly in that particular web address, so you'll be moved on to that particular index page like www.msn.com index.html. So here index is the file name, so you are directly accessing that particular file in that website. Suppose if you are moving on to a particular folder and you are accessing a file inside that folder, so you'll be having the web address like http://www.msn.com /ads/xhtml. That is a html file. So here you are accessing a file inside the folder, so you will be having this web address like this. So this is an example for relative URL. That is, a relative URL will have the file name or the folder name with the file name. That is, it contains only the partial address of a document. I hope you all understood about the URL and its type, that is the absolute URL and relative URL. Thank you.